All right, I have 6 o'clock. So, will the secretary please call the roll?
Ms. Como?
Here.
Dr. Cooper-Stoll?
Here.
Mr. Jimenez?
Excused.
Thank you. Ms. Leahy?
Here.
Mr. Lee? Oh, I think he just
Here,
dropped
wasn't he?
off. He was, yeah, he just dropped off. I wonder if he might have hit the wrong button. Mr. Meyer?
I have not heard from Mr. Meyer.
Okay. Mr. Korberg?
Here.
Mr. Spivey?
Here.
Mr. Turner?
There's Mr. Lee.
Yep.
I haven't heard from Mr. Turner.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Baines? I don't think we have Evan on tonight. Mr. Baggett?
Here.
Thank you.
So a quorum of the Board of Education is present. The regularly scheduled meeting of November 2nd, 2020 is called to order. We will now have the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Tonight's agenda has previously been distributed to the board with a motion from Mr. Korber and seconded by Ms. Como to approve the agenda as submitted. We will have a roll call vote unless there is a motion to amend. Ms. Steigerwald.
Ms. Como?
Aye.
Ms. Leahy?
Aye.
Mr. Lee?
Aye.
Mr. Korberg?
Aye.
Mr. Spivey?
Aye.
Dr. Cooper-Stoll?
Aye. Okay, we don't have any public speakers registered for this evening. We do want to take a moment to say hello to our new student rep from Logan High School, and that is Danny Baggett. Welcome.
Hey.
We look forward to having you serve on the board this year and hearing more from you. As you know, you have an opportunity to share any announcements later in the meeting. Is there anything you want to share at this point?
No.
Okay. Thank you and welcome, Mr. Baggett.
Thank
All right.
you.
Consent agenda announcements.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the items on the superintendent's consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Dr. Engel, are there any announcements that you'd like to make before we approve the consent agenda?
Just one. I would like to let Mr. Harsey or Dr. Harsey speak on one item.
Good evening, board members. I do have one retirement that I'd like to point out. You can see the retirement of Sue Newcomb. Just a little background on Sue, somebody who I'm very familiar with, having worked directly with Sue. I appreciate Mr. White allowing me to speak just a moment on Sue's retirement. Just a little background. Sue started with the school district February 27th, 1984, totaling almost 37 years serving children and families and college kids. She worked at Franklin, Summit, Roosevelt, and Logan Middle School. And, you know, we like to pull a little excerpt out of an evaluation over the years. It just so happens I went in the Wayback Machine here. I pulled one from May of 2008 that I had an opportunity to author. Just a quick excerpt here. Mrs. Newcomb is a subtle and unassuming practitioner who goes about her daily efforts with little fanfare, and I believe she prefers it that way. That said, Mrs. Newcomb certainly has the ability, savvy, and tact to be a prominent leader, and she's proven to do that over the years. Mrs. Newcomb is a role model for all educators. She effectively melds a knowledge contextually of students, her colleagues, systems and protocols, and strategy with a nearly palpable understanding of the power relationships. Mrs. Newcomb has students contacting her years after they've experienced her educational approach to share their stories and good fortunes. Mrs. Newcomb is an incredibly influential practitioner. and I'm humbled and honored to work with someone of Mrs. Newcomb's ilk. She's a splendid representative of the School District of La Crosse. She's been a wonderful person to work alongside, and we'll be sad to see her go, but wish her the best of luck in her retirement.
Believe you're muted, Dr. Cooper-Stoll.
Thank you, Dr. Engel. All right, the consent agenda is a mechanism used by the board to deal with routine business that must come before the body. Are there any items that members want to remove from the consent agenda? All right, I believe a motion was made by Mr. Korberg. Was it seconded by Ms. Como? Okay. And seconded by Ms. Como to approve the items on the superintendent's consent agenda as presented. Ms. Segerwall, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Ms. Como,
Aye.
Ms. Leahy,
Aye.
Mr. Lee,
Aye.
Mr. Korberg,
Aye. I don't want to hit the off button.
thank you, Mr. Spivey,
Aye.
Dr. Cooper-Stoll,
Aye. All right, next we have the board consent agenda.
And I'd like to make a motion to approve the items on the board consent agenda as presented.
Second.
All right, a motion has been made by Mr. Korberg and seconded by Ms. Como to approve the items on the board consent agenda as presented. We'll have a roll call vote.
Ms. Como,
Aye.
Ms. Leahy,
Aye.
Mr. Lee,
Aye.
Mr. Korberg,
Aye.
Mr. Spivey,
Aye.
Dr. Cooper-Stoll.
Aye. All right, so we're gonna move now down to matters that are reserved for board action. And the first item that we have is the results R2 academic performance.
I'll make a motion to approve the results R2 academic performance monitoring report template as presented.
Second.
All right, a motion has been made by Mr. Korberg and seconded by Ms. Como to approve the results R2 academic performance monitoring report template as presented. We're going to open it up now for discussion.
I would like to thank Dr. Lahucky for working diligently on R2 and R3. And if it's okay with the board, I would offer him an opportunity to kind of just talk through some of the major pieces there if the board is interested in hearing some of the details.
Yes.
All right, Dr. Lahucky.
Thanks for having me tonight. This is results policy part 2. If you remember, I don't even remember the first time. It might have been in the spring or early summer. We offered the first glimpse of a results policy. I received that. Well, some things have changed, right? So first, I received feedback from that first presentation that was used to change the results policies. We've also have a pandemic, which doesn't necessarily change results policies, but it will make it more challenging to collect some of this data that's listed in here. We also have a new superintendent. So the first time the results policy was written, Mr. Nelson was the superintendent. And although Dr. Engel was quick to point out and gave me some thanks for doing the work, it was a team effort to work on these results policies, and they indicate what he would value towards his evaluation. And finally, especially in R3, there was a lot of wording changes when it came to what the policies said, which led to different measures and indicators used. So I thought I would go through R2 and just point out a few of the highlights and the why behind some of these, and then answer any questions you have about R2, and then move on. So the first one, Wisconsin Student Assessment System. One of the pieces of feedback that I received is I used the word increase. And it's a vague word, and it's almost intentionally vague in that when you use a standardized assessment, especially the Wisconsin Forward, there's some things to think about when you're talking about improvement. First of all, standards are assessed differently every year, meaning that different standards are selected from one year to the next. There are more, for example, ELA standards that exist and that are actually assessed. So by simply changing the standards that are assessed, it's hard to get that clear picture of proficiency. Hypothetically, you could go down in proficiency, but have overall improved achievement, if that makes any sense, or academic performance. Secondly, when you have a standardized test like the Wisconsin Forward, when students score really well on a particular standard, guess what? The question will get tossed because and they'll work to use that test as a sorting tool as well for students. So that's something to consider. Question difficulty. It'll be really interesting, I think, to see if there's any talk about changing the difficulty of questions the next time we take the Wisconsin Forward, or if it'll be static level of difficulty, well, static as possible, or if they'll account for some of the lost learning that occurred and maybe some of the standards that have been missed. Thus far, I haven't heard that any of that would happen, but that's just an example of the variability from year to year. So if you go with a straight measure of, okay, we're at 45% proficient, next year we want to be 46, that's tricky. So the rationale compared to the state average is all those factors that I mentioned, well, all the districts are faced with the same thing. So if we compare ourselves to the state average and our goal being above the state average, then all those variability factors that I mentioned are the same for all. So that seemed to be a good way to go about it. Social studies, I would point out specifically, social studies is a tricky one. It's one of our core content areas, but when it comes to standardized assessments in Wisconsin, we don't have content area standards for social studies. We have grade level bands that aren't content specific. For example, if they asked a question about some element of Wisconsin history, for example, that could differ based on where you live in the state, because often social studies becomes a local endeavor based on the overall standards. So there's a high correlation between reading and performance on the social studies test. Just wanted to point that particular aspect out because that would impact our performance in social studies. The second one talks about problem solving, critical analysis. That was one that went towards depth of knowledge. So to explain depth of knowledge, there are 4 levels of depth of knowledge. It was created in 1997 by Norman Webb. And the first one is more like recall type questions. Recall would be like, hey, what's the capital of Wisconsin, right? As a particular question. The second level is often compare and contrast questions. And that is the most popular question type on the Wisconsin Forward exam. Some basic relationships, basic knowledge that is on the Wisconsin Forward. What was focused on for Results Policy 2.2 is Depth of Knowledge 3, which is strategic analysis. It's not just knowing the information, but being able to apply it in some way, which would indicate some level of problem solving and strategic analysis. That's why it was selected. The fourth, you probably don't remember this, or maybe it wasn't clarified, but do you remember the Badger exam? So they took a big swing at Depth of Knowledge 4 and had these extended learning, a really intentional attempts to get to Depth of Knowledge 4. That didn't work out so well due to the complex nature. It didn't fit the standardized exam. That's something we do in our classroom, and it might be an indicator that I try to suss out a little bit more as we go forward. But for now, I think that Depth of Knowledge level 3 seems to be a good landing spot for us because it's easy to pull that out. However, what I don't think I can get is how we perform compared to the state. I don't believe that's reported, but we can measure performance to the prior year and try to improve in the percent that score at a higher level. The third indicator in Results Policy 2, that is the redefining ready measures. It's career ready, it's college ready, and then both career and college ready. Each one of those elements, and there's hyperlinked there, there's research behind why they're selected. And this is a national movement. It is one of the pieces of feedback from the first time around is that a lot of the results we had on there were secondary focused, and Redefining Ready is secondary focused. So this would give us good information towards how our students are prepared for career and college ready experiences. So that's a quick run through of results policy 2. Do you have any questions that I can answer?
I have a question for you, Dr. Lehucky. I'm just curious about on that last point, 2.3, as you mentioned, it's broken out by career ready, college ready, and both. I just was wondering, like, why, how that's measured so that that third category of both, how is that? Can you explain a little bit about how each of those categories are measured?
Sure. Why did this? Let's start with the why. When people looked at the school report cards and the district report cards, they said there's something missing here. And so there was a national effort led by superintendents around the country to try to better quantify and describe what it really means to be ready for the workforce or to go on to the university. And so some of the measures might be, we look at attendance during the freshman year. We look at receiving a C or better in Algebra 2 as an indicator of college success. And based on some of the, I would call them academic side of the things, like your ACT scores in different categories, and then combined with some of our engagement type things, and I mentioned attendance as one of those. So combined good attendance with high academic achievement means that you're both career and college ready. So we'll have what people like about the Redefining Ready is it gives students an opportunity to have some skin in the game. Normally you take a standardized test and you get an individual result and it's like, oh, great, I received a 22 on my ACT, yay, right? And maybe that can be used to apply for a university, maybe not. However, in this particular instance, we can have students that by reaching the different requirements for career and college ready can individually say at the end, I am career ready because of, and then list out the reasons that they are. I am college ready because, and specifically be able to list out why they are. And if they can reach benchmark for both career and college ready, then they can say I'm both career and college ready. It allows students to have personal goals to attain rather than taking a standardized test that gets washed into an overall school or district composite. It gives them an opportunity to individually shine.
And it also does not require, like, all the check boxes don't have to be checked. It might be 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 5. So there's multiple pathways for a student to demonstrate that they're college or career ready. And it kind of takes into account the unique path each student might travel to get there.
There's so many factors that make you college ready. I feel like we don't, and we admit we can't track them, such as volunteering and all of the extracurriculars, the clubs, etc. Is there a? I'm just putting that out there that's not something that you could put in this document that adds on to that ability to become career or college ready. You could be volunteering for Habitat for Humanity and want to go and build houses and not consider that a college career and just go straight to work for it. So those types of factors, as wonderful as they are, cannot be measured. So I just want that on record.
Dr. Engel has a really good example. Volunteerism knows lots of forms, right? Volunteering for your family, it might be just what your family needs. It doesn't have to be something as grandiose as Habitat for Humanity. There's lots of ways to serve your family and community. And this would allow the student to be able to recognize themselves as doing that work.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Pelton. Are there any other questions or comments about R2 for Dr. Lehucky?
I was wondering what Educ Climber was. I'm familiar with the other assessments, but not what that was.
Educ Climber is for somebody like me it's just the best. And what it does is it allows for behavior, attendance, and academics to be easily tracked and used by educators for instructional improvement. It's what's called a data warehouse. So we haven't had that in the district before, where we can see what the connections are between attendance and say behavior and academic performance all on the same chart. And it leads to more robust discussions to figure out what is the root cause. Student not attending, why aren't they attending? Not having to look through not have to look at multiple places to really take a data dive. It'll be a very powerful tool. We can put interventions in there. We can tag students in various ways. When I look at some of the results policies, I know Educ Climber will be my friend because that is how I can sort of sort students into groups to be able to really take a deep dive to see how we're doing.
And that's something that we just purchased this upcoming year, is that right? Or
We did last year, and we spent most of the year populating with data and getting it set up with our individual schools and users and systems, and we've done individual trainings and group trainings for staff. So no, it will make a great difference for us.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Leahy. Any final questions or comments for Mr. Lehucky before we vote? All right, Ms. Steigerwald, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Ms. Como?
Aye.
Ms. Leahy?
Aye.
Mr. Lee?
Aye.
Mr. Korberg?
Aye.
Mr. Spivey?
Aye.
Mr. Turner?
Aye.
Dr. Cooper Stoll?
Aye. All right, next we have results R3 involve citizenship.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the results R3 involve citizenship monitoring report template as presented.
Second.
A motion has been made by Mr. Korberg and seconded by Ms. Como to approve the results R3 involve citizenship monitoring report template as presented. I'll now open that up for discussion.
I would just like to preview this by saying that the measures here were a little harder to find than the academic ones, and there are some things that are still maybe a bit prospective. So we know what we're looking to measure, but we may not have fully developed the tool yet. And so looking for a little trust in allowing us to get there in this particular policy, and also open to feedback and discussion on your thoughts to ensure that we're monitoring things in the way that you want. So feedback is greatly welcome, and I'll let Dr. Lehucky explain from here.
Yes, that's fair. In that the results policy, the R3, went into some areas that other districts that use coherent governance typically didn't or did not, which I take it as, hey, we want different results. So let's forge the path that we want to get the results that we're looking for. I shared R3 the first time around. There were some pretty substantial wording changes that helped, I think, clarify what the board's vision were, and I found those helpful, and Dr. Engel and Dr. Harsey found those helpful to help us hone in more on what the board was looking for. But with that said, Dr. Engel said it well. We are looking for feedback because this is a more challenging area to measure. There's not a Wisconsin Forward exam for a lot of the elements of R3. So going through those, the first one we measure citizenship, participation in our democratic process. That one actually was pretty clear cut for us. It's the percentage of students in La Crosse passing the civics exam on the first try will increase over the prior year. A little bit of a data collection difference for us. We haven't really differentiated between first try and second try. but that'll be good information to have. The second one is the participation of our voters registration. So not necessarily high school seniors, but high school seniors that are 18 years old. We would recognize what the level of voter registration is for that graduating class. In R2, we looked at skills in team and individual endeavors, taking two different approaches here. The first is the co-curricular participation. This is actually one of the redefining ready indicators. Participation in two or more co-curricular activities will increase. So we pulled that data to use a little bit differently for R3 too. The second is academic career planning, or ACP. So we would have all full-time enrolled students will complete the ACP grade level benchmarks. So Zello is the program that's measured here. It's the software that the state of Wisconsin uses for academic and career planning. And there are certain tools within ACP. For example, in 6th grade, we'd have all of our students complete the learning styles inventory. What do you like? How do you learn? Matchmaker. In my skills, you start to do some career exploration. In grade 8, we would track the percentage of students that have individual counselor meetings. Once again, once you hit 9th grade, I don't know about you, but your preferences change as you learn more and are experienced to more things. So we would do the matchmaker inventory again. There's sophomore conferences in grade 10. In grade 11, completion of Zello inventory and career selector. There's a lot more in that program. It helps you schedule college visits and really take a real deep dive on what it is that you'd want to learn more about for your career. In R3, effective communication skills. I had to chuckle a little bit because one of the pieces of feedback that I received from Dr. Cooper Stoll with the first time that this was presented was, I don't know how you're going to measure this. If I was at the university, we would just look at everybody takes speech course and we would be good to go. It's a little more challenging in the public school setting where speech isn't a required course. With that said, there's two different writing prompts. So grades 3 through 8, we can pull the Wisconsin Forward writing scores and ACT writing for our 11th graders. For our elementary, we focus more on the oral communication, and that would use our school report card and pull the data from our school report card to indicate that they are satisfactorily participating and communicating in their course. R34, practice good stewardship towards the environment. This one other districts had, and they used it by club participation in science environment related clubs. And we weren't really sure that means that you actually apply environmental stewardship, but rather that you're just part of a club. So in working with the science supervisors, we came up with citizen science, and this is a newer term, but basically it's the practice of public participation and collaboration in scientific research to increase scientific knowledge. So for example, our partnerships with our community, universities, local organizations where we can make a direct impact in results. That's something that we can measure with our student participation in that. And we thought that that would be a good measure for 3.4. 3.5 is recognize the impact of social location or positionality on how new individuals see, understand, and experience the world around them. I had worked with Dr. Cooper Stoll, I think, on some filtering questions, for a lack of a better term, so we can suss out data by different reference group. We had spoken about using the PBIS school climate survey, which gives questions like, I feel safe at school, I have an adult that cares about me, and gets into some of the basics. But the way the results policies are worded, it's not sufficient. And I think we have to find and develop more robust questions to add to that survey to get into more of the specifics that are in 3.5 and actually 3.6. Where we landed was we would start with the PBIS school culture survey, because we do that with PBIS in the district already, but then add some extra questions that can get to the heart of what we believe 3.5 and 3.6 to be. So when Dr. Engel mentioned that some of this is trust and it's unfinished, this is exactly where we're at. There are tools that get to this, but they tend to be very, very comprehensive in time, in scope. And we are trying to find ways to still get to that information without adding a lot of extra assessments to the district. So it's a bit of a balance right now.
I would say the other challenge is like the developmentally appropriate types of questions and scenarios that we present to students. So, positionality in 5th grade looks a little bit different than in 11th grade, and our expectations are different. So understanding, systems of oppression in 5th grade looks different than in 8th or 11th grade. And there aren't like pre-canned surveys or already existing methods for this stuff. And so we're kind of out in uncharted territory in terms of trying to develop something. And so that will be some significant work that we have to do between now and, when we monitor this.
Can I jump in? Okay, Dr. Lehucky, my hope is that the changes that the board approved to those policies, I hope it actually was helpful in terms of making some of the revisions to the template. Because obviously we're not trying to make anyone's job more difficult, but to provide additional clarity. So when the board approved 3.5 and 3.6, I was particularly thrilled because these really reflect, I think, the commitment of this board to making sure that we have an education system where all students feel valued, included, and safe. And that it's understood not just at an interpersonal level, but at a systemic level. So my belief in bringing those two changes forward for the board to vote on is actually not, I don't believe we have to reinvent the wheel on this. I think R5 and particularly 3.5 and 3.6 particularly speak to curriculum. So the way I read it, and I invite any other board members, if you interpret it differently, please to speak up. But the way that I, interpret it, and my intention when bringing it forward was that by the time students graduate from our school district, they need to be able to demonstrate mastery of these things, right? Unfortunately, we live in an era where there are age-appropriate curriculum to engage in all of this work. But I assume, I'm like hoping and assuming, and I'm sure in at least a couple cases, we're already doing this. For example, I know there was an English 11 rewrite that just happened for this year. Like, to me, this isn't about creating a survey that asks students to report on these things. To me, in fact, that's not good enough in terms of showing as a district that we're doing our due diligence when it comes to actually showing the results for those policies. We ought to be able to point to and say, this is the curriculum that students have to take as a student in our district. And as part of that curriculum, they're either taking an exam or writing a paper or engaging in a project or something that shows that they understand positionality, but more than that, as 3.6 says, that they can demonstrate an understanding of how systems work together to produce injustice and demonstrate ways to address injustice. So I would actually have you think about not creating some kind of new metric or survey to get at that. In fact, I personally wouldn't be satisfied by that as a board member. I want us to be able to point to here's where we do this in this particular class. And I'm not talking about obviously a history class. So oftentimes these discussions often come up around systemic inequality, but where do we find this throughout our curriculum? I know we've got great teachers and staff in our district who are doing this work, and I'm sure you see it too. So how can we incorporate, how can we make that part of the metrics that we're using? Because R2 to me looks, we just passed and approved, looked great to me. And really R3, Dr. Lecky, on all of the measures, like I thought that was, I don't have any issue with any of that. But when we get to 3.5 and 3.6, which again are like, to me, like so important, like, I am not satisfied with what we're bringing forward for that. And I definitely understand about, and I think the board has done this and being generous and giving some leeway for like, yes, go forth this year and let's measure it and see where we stand. But I actually think this is so important that I need a little bit more in terms of like how we're going to be how you think we can measure 3.5 and 3.6. And I'm directing this primarily to you, Dr. Engel, because as the superintendent, because I would hate, with the importance of 3.5 and 3.6, to wait a year and find out maybe we didn't quite get at that, and now we got to wait another year to do it. But please, other thoughts or questions or from board members?
I just have a question. Like, that is so huge. There are adults who don't even, and they should focus on that. It's so broad and huge. I would like to be able to give a little bit more direction versus saying we want all of these terms fulfilled, or we want all, like, I just want to give a little bit more guidance to Dr. Engel and Dr. Lehucky as to what you want as a result of it. Because yes, we have a lot of amazing teachers that do it, but not every student gets that teacher, or not every student is in that school, or there's so much going on there. How do we assist without putting a larger burden on them by saying, here's 2 measures that are huge, give us results from it? So is there something that you're saying? I mean, because I can come back to last year where we're saying we should be teaching Hmong history because that's huge. That's very important. The results thing that we're talking about for the policies for the school district or for the school board at this date, they're talking about the Indigenous education that may or may not be happening correctly. So there's so much we have to kind of say, okay, this is what I think the La Crosse School District needs to focus on this year. Once we get that kind of going, then we can add to it. I just think it's so much.
I think it's an excellent point, Ms. Como. So I want to say a couple things to that. One, I think that our wording, we've tried to keep it fairly, we have tried to avoid, I think, as a board, and I would hope that the administration appreciates this being so specific that, it has to fit within a particular mold. I can only speak for myself as a board member, so others, please feel free to speak up. I'm not necessarily looking for, here's what we do in kindergarten, here's what we do in first grade. But to me, what I would like to see is there are some clear examples of where this is included within our curriculum, and if it's part of the curriculum, it's not just a matter of, because I appreciate your point about what if you have this teacher, but you don't have this teacher. But there are things that at certain points in your education within our school district, you are going to be introduced to, and that by the time you graduate, you've demonstrated some degree of understanding about it. I am perfectly willing to give some flexibility for what that looks like. My concern is with the current metric of trying to develop a survey or questions that ask students to identify whether or not they've mastered this. I'm saying that's not good enough for me. What I would like to see is we're not asking students' opinion, but we literally, so let's say, for example, since I know there was that English 11 rewrite that just happened this year, and that's going to incorporate an emphasis on like racial justice and, and equity. I am sure there's probably a paper that's due in that class, or there's something that's due in that class that might even itself be a measure that we can point to and say, here's where we do that here. So I definitely agree with you. Like, we shouldn't be, I'm not looking at something that is fully developed at this point, because this is the first year we're going to monitor it. I'm just concerned with.
So are you thinking they all read the same book? Are you thinking they all read the same book, or that?
That is
so
for
that
the administration to determine.
Aaron, were you going to say something? I saw that.
Yeah, just a couple things. So one of the things that we've been very conscious about in trying to avoid is measuring our own effort versus the outcomes of students. And so we've talked about lots of different things, Dr. Lahucky and Dr. Harsey and I, but you know, I would be hesitant to measure how many times we've offered, you know, something, as opposed to have students been able to demonstrate it. And so I think that gets to the crux of this. We're not asked to offer opportunities to learn about positionality and systems of impression. We're asked to determine if they can actually do it. And so so that's one thing. So process versus outcome, that's something that we're thinking about. And then the other thing is, you know, if like this English course is a great example of this, where is it something that all students are required to engage in, or is it by your choice as you navigate the system? You know, some students may avoid those things that make them feel uncomfortable, or they may seek all of them out. And I'm hesitant to rely on, you know, a single series of courses versus thinking about this as embedded throughout our curriculum. And it's easier to identify those courses, so to speak, at the high school level, and you could identify units and various things, you know, at lower levels. So like all of that kind of put together led us to trying to assess all students, and not just on whether or not they took a thing, but whether or not they actually embody those understandings. And so obviously still looking for feedback, but those were just some of our considerations as we tried to navigate what would be a useful way to measure this particular policy.
All right, so a couple things on that. So one, agreed, like it's not such a matter of, I don't think that we offer these classes is a suitable metric. But if we're offering those classes, I know there are assessments that are given in those classes, whether they're multiple choice tests or papers or whatnot, that I'm saying may already exist that you can tap into without having to create a new metric. But also, the assumption is that students are learning, right, as they matriculate through the La Crosse school district, that they are learning about, for example, how systems of oppression work together, okay? So it seems fitting to me that we must have there's got to be curriculum in place in order to teach students that, if we expect them to show some mastery of that. If we're just going to create a survey divorced from any particular class or curriculum that simply asks students to identify these concepts, to me, even though that provides some feedback, the heart of 3.5 and 3.6 was about ensuring that as part of our curriculum in our district, whether that be, to Don's point, you know, making sure that we're following Act 31, making sure that we incorporate an understanding of Hmong history and Hmong language. Like, I'm just saying, is there not a way we can tie those things together, because it gets really at what it is we need to what this is really about, which 3.5 and 3.6 for me are really about the curriculum that exists. And within that curriculum, how are student learning objectives being measured?
So if I can chime in on that. So I agree with the assessment. I think the assessment is pretty much an integral part of instruction, right? It determines whether or not the goals of education are being met, right? Assessments affect decisions about grades, placement, advancement, instructions, curriculum. So I really think that the assessment it pretty much inspires us to ask like the hard questions. Like, are we teaching what we think we're teaching? Are students actually learning what they're supposed to be learning? And so I think that without, re-examining or redoing the wheel, if you will, to just look at like the assessment standpoint of I don't think that what stands right now is adequate. So I totally agree with Dr. Cooperstall. So I don't know, that's just my 2 cents on that thing. I think that I think to try to get some kind of assessment, I don't know, I think it promotes better learning in a sense, if you will. So it's something we need to figure out. I wouldn't have it stand as it stands right now. I think we need to do a little bit more work.
The focus on curriculum rather than student perception is helpful. That would give us more of a focus to work through. Your initial statement was if you hope the changes to results policies actually helped. I think that's how you worded it, or something like that. The answer is yes, most definitely. They were definitely helpful suggestions to get to what you were looking for.
And I appreciate the work that's been done on this, Ms. Dr. Lefebvre. I think we're so much further along. I think we're so much closer to where we began. But if there are other board members that think that particular metric for 3.5 and 3.6 are sufficient, by all means, please speak to that. Maybe I am on a limb here in terms of my concerns.
I don't think so. I think what you're saying is pretty accurate. In fact, where I would go with it almost is I worked in a district, so I kind of have seen some things, happen. And so when I think of like how we roll out PBIS or somebody in the school district is going to have to remind me what it's called when like all the students are learning about safety and all the students are learning about, like, we have days literally set aside for that type of work. And essentially that's almost what I would see this as, right? So there's that curriculum piece, but then there's that intentional teaching about difference and all of the various categories that we have here. So, I mean, I don't want to tell you all how to do it, but I think if you need suggestions, let me know. But I do think that like this wouldn't be enough for me, specifically when we talk like the climate survey and things like that, but really getting creative. So like it is a large goal. And in some ways, shape or form, it hasn't, it's happened in some areas and maybe it hasn't happened in other districts or whatever the case may be, but this is the opportunity to get creative with how we assess this. And recognizing that curriculum is going to be a part of that. So that might be one avenue. And then the other avenue might be that the district has set up something that all students must go through every year or whatever that needs to look like. So there's that piece. I want to talk about 3.3, but I see there's some other folks that want to talk about this. So I'll let you go first and then I'll come back.
I just have one question then. I mean, I agree that, I'm cool with teaching it and that type of thing, but are we expecting them to say, all right, we've done this for system of oppression, this for social location, this for racism, this for sexism, this for that. I'm trying to say, do they have to meet a measure for every single one of those marks? Or are we saying in general, we just want to know that something about this is being taught so that we can measure it? That's where I'm saying it's so broad. And they probably, today talk about it and not measure it because it's just so natural to them to discuss it versus making it an official, oh, okay, now check mark, I've talked about social location. Oh, we've talked about food deserts. Oh, we've talked about this, those types of things. That's where I'm going, is how can we give them a little bit of, if we're saying we're giving them leeway by saying just because the term's on there doesn't mean you have to put a check mark or a grade by it, then I'm okay. But I just feel like that's, if you were testing on that and assessing on that, that's 7 more assessments, and we're all telling people, oh my God, we're over testing kids, and now we're assessing 7 more things. That's where I'm trying to give a little to the school district of, that's a lot. Let's let them work their way into.
Well, the reality is all systems of oppression are connected, and so, and them being able to handle one, but even if we're talking about system of oppression, you can't talk about system of oppressions without talking about racism, homophobia, transphobia, social location, ableism, and the like.
But are you going to have them grade separately then, or should we just say system of oppression and put all of those underneath that versus labeling them each separately as bolded definitions?
I see those as examples, Ms. Como. They're listed there behind there. We define them to help other people understand, what those are if they're unfamiliar with some of those terms. But I don't see the actual the result, as being difficult to come up with stuff. Where I'm seeing a difference in how this is viewed for me is the instructional program. The obligation to provide instruction would fall under OE11, instructional program. That is something different than, do students embody this particular thing? And we can look to instructional programs that we have, and we can use those embedded assessments to get to that answer. But it would not be sufficient for me to say, look at all the places we've taught this and count it good. I would want to ensure that we have determined if the students actually embody those concepts that we're looking for. And so that's where I see the difference between the instructional program and teaching it and versus the results policy and did students learn it.
So here's what I keep coming back to, Dr. Engel. And I don't know if we're just like talking past each other or what, because I agree with everything you just said. It's not simply good enough to say we taught these 5 courses and they talked about that. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but if I'm mirroring back to you what you just said, what it sounded like to me was that, we don't want to just say we offer these classes. We want to make sure that students can demonstrate that they have, mastered or, learned, put into practice what they learned in those classes. Okay, first of all, before I go any further, is that what you're, okay, I just want to make sure we're on the same page. Okay.
Yep.
So every class has student learning objectives as part of that class, right? So I guess I'm still like, am I not making sense? Like, so as part of taking that class though, students will have to demonstrate that they have mastered those learning objectives. So what is it about that doesn't satisfy your belief that is sufficient? And much like all of our other policies, this is why Randy and Linda have encouraged us to use more than one metric, because, oftentimes you got to use more than one metric. So, what is it about that doesn't satisfy for you, that you don't think captures that students have learned those objectives?
I don't know that 100% of students take a course that embodies those concepts. Certainly not as it currently exists. We can certainly change that. That is obviously part of the plan. However, it and ideally it's embedded throughout and it's not a standalone course. Like you should learn about systems of oppression in science class and in your health class and in English class. You know, it should just be a part of how you learn the world. The difficulty right now for me is like, not every student takes the courses that would naturally be set up to do this right now. And so to simply assess the students that have gone through particular courses would lead me wanting in my ability to affect all students in achieving this goal. And there are some who will achieve this understanding in spite of the courses that they have taken, you know, because of other experiences that they've had in their life. And so I would just want something that stands alone a little bit, you know, that's aside from some sort of course specific thing. Or I don't want it to be as simple as pointing to, well, we put the SLO in that 5th grade curriculum, so check mark, we're done. No, I wanna have an independent assessment. If I'm gonna feel comfortable saying to the school board, our students understand positionality and systems of oppression, it's not enough for me to say that we included that unit in 5th grade curriculum. So I guess that's the trouble that I have in relying on its presence in our curriculum as understanding.
I'm not disagreeing with any of that. I don't disagree with any of that. On the same hand, the standalone measure we currently have, divorced from any curriculum we can point to where students might have access to in order to more adequately demonstrate their understanding, also feels inadequate. So, and if I understand you correctly, and I think that this is the case, that the hope is, especially as you're developing this equity plan, that over the next few years, this will become more embedded throughout our curriculum. So I also get that we are not there in this moment. But the question then still comes back to, before we vote on this, like whether or not the board is okay with, like, is this one metric alone that right now is still pretty fuzzy because we don't quite have a metric.
I think we can easily add a second measure that points to curriculum, kind of as a supporting measure. For me, it just wouldn't be either thing, or it just wouldn't be enough to say that we had taught it. That would be not sufficient for me. I want students to embody this. So I think if we can both point to curriculum and some of those assessments, so we add that in as another measure under our 3, 5, and 6, and then also seek ways to kind of independently confirm that students have embodied these characteristics that we want them to have as they leave our system.
For me, I would hope that that embodiment, that teaching starts as early as possible, because I think once somebody gets something in their head, it's very hard to change it. So the younger we can start it, the more we can impress upon young kids what it means, the better off they will be when they get to high school and beyond. They might even be more interested in taking those classes you thought they might not take before. It might trigger something going, hey, this is a passion. This is something I want to explore and learn about. So the younger, the better.
So my last 2 cents in talking about like the assessment piece, I really believe like asking students to demonstrate their understanding of the subject matter is completely critical in the learning process. It's essential to essentially to evaluate whether the educational goals and standards are being met. So I think that it just draws back to like, what are we doing? How do we assess this? I don't believe as it stands, I would be happy with it at all, to be completely honest. I know it's a work in progress for sure. And I thank Dr. Lahucky for the work he's been doing on it, but it definitely is far from where we need to be. The fact that they take the class should not be the end all be all. It is to evaluate whether the educational goals and standards and lessons are being met. That's a critical It's very critical in the learning process. So yeah, that's where my 2 cents end.
Mr. Spivey, there was one you wanted to go back to.
Yes, and the other thing that I was thinking about, I had to go back up to because when I'm thinking about 3.5 and 3.6, I'm also looking at 3.2. And when we talk about being involved in 2 or more co-curricular activities, I believe that as a district, we have co-curricular activities that are specific towards some of these topics around systemic oppression or affinity groups. And maybe that might be another metric that needs to be added into 3.5 and 3.6.
So I was actually going to go back up to that exact same thing, just because I wanted a little bit more definition about what it meant in regards to, is that 2 co-curricular activities in 1 year? What year does that start? Does it start in 1st grade and they got to be in 2 co-curricular activities? I mean, when you hit high school and kids have to work for their family, how, like that was me, I had to work every weekend. How do I do the 2 co-curriculars? Is it because I was in band all through high school that I would meet it, because that was 4 years of being in a co-curricular? So just kind of defining, is it 2 in a year, 2 in a school, you know, like high school, middle school, grade school, that type of thing, so that you know what you're measuring, if that makes sense? Because I don't know what you're measuring there in regards to time.
I think Dr. Lahaki can clarify what that means, and then we can swing back around to Mr. Spivey's point.
3-2, the redefining ready indicator, is within the school year.
And that includes any, established group in our school district. So, if you're part of pep band or if you play.
What about those ones that aren't necessarily, and I know we've gotten better at it, but like girls running was one that wasn't being counted for the longest time, and now at Northside it is. But there are some clubs and activities that might not be quote unquote registered with the school district as being an official co-curricular. So that makes it also unique.
The redefining ready is a high school indicator. So those we track pretty well. So the Northside, like running club, that wouldn't be factored in on this. It would just be for high school.
Thank you.
So the other point I wanted to go to was 3.3. And I just had a question or a suggestion. Not sure how you want to take it. But when we talk about, sorry, my paper's printed out funny. Communication skills, right? When we talk high school, it seems like the ACT is pretty good. The only oral communicator really is the 1st through 5th grade. And I kind of struggle with that, right? Because I feel like there should be a means to be able to do written and oral communication in middle and high school as well. So can you speak to that a little bit? Like, is there not an opportunity? I know that not everybody takes speech, but is there a way to bring in that oral communication to be and also keep in mind, I'm doing this in terms of being culturally responsive, because not everybody's going to be 100% accurate with writing and things of that. Well, we don't got to get into all that. That won't be a history lesson. But could y'all speak to that as to why you went that route, as opposed to thinking about the oral communication in middle and high school?
Dr. Lahaki, perhaps you could dive into some of our limitations in oral assessment at the middle and high.
Right. Well, the class offerings don't exist. So I did look into the report card to try to find communication type things that we could measure. I'll be honest, we use our report cards as communication tools. Really, that's what they are at the elementary. Here's how you're doing here. It will be really interesting to break down that data because it's never been done. We've never really looked at the outcomes on report cards other than communication. Where I think it'll be interesting is with the elementary to see if we do have gaps in the grading, because then you can dive into some of the root causes there. Another reason why you saw it at elementary and not middle were simply that we wanted to have some sort of scope K-12. So ACT was the high school, middle school, we did have the Wisconsin Forward Writing Prompt, and then elementary, we could use a writing prompt there, but it did have that report card indicator to try to connect at least at one of our levels to an oral component. So it wasn't all writing.
And Dr. Lehucky, at the middle and high school level, are there opportunities for oral communication assessment? It's not routinely built in anywhere as far as I know.
No, it's not, unless we move to a standards-based grading aspect at the middle school and high school, which isn't out of the realm of possibility. If we start to break things down by standard, like we do at the elementary, then all of a sudden we do have the opportunity for oral communication at each of the levels, for sure. But right now, I can't think of a measure that all students would have for oral communication as it stands.
One of the difficulties with the standardized testing movement that came up in the wake of No Child Left Behind was things that weren't measured got de-emphasized. And one of the losses has been oral communications. Speech used to be a hallmark of high schools, and it has fallen to the wayside in the wake of the emphasis on written communication, which is a problem, but it's also where we're at. So standards-based grading would allow us to get back to some of those other elements because it would emphasize them in ways that we haven't to this point.
Well, I would like to just put it out there that I think that if standards-based grading is what's going to give us the results that we need, we should really be looking into that. I think when you talk about, your synopsis on the No Child Left Behind Act, again, and we go back to 3.5 and 3.6, that's a form of systematic oppression, and it negatively impacts individuals of color and indigenous people. And so we have to really truly think about this communication skill metric in a way of how do we bring that in for those individuals where English is not their native language, or, their history was the way they communicate has always been oral. And granted, there might be some folks who are listening that are probably like, well, if their communication style is oral, then they just need to learn how to read and comprehend and so on and so forth. But the reality of it is that, well, I won't go there. But the reality of it is really, truly making sure that we're here for all students and supporting the learning of all students. And learning looks differently for each person and each culture. And we have to make room for that in our system. If we're not making room for that, essentially we're perpetuating systemic racism and systemic oppression of our students and families.
I know Miss Everson's chomping at the bit because she has been a huge champion towards standards-based grading. Our ELA standards have oral communication baked within them. So we've had some discussions with that. It's a tricky time to roll out a grading conversation right now. But there's been some initial work, especially at the secondary level. We have it at the elementary, and that's why I can report out the elementary already. But if we do move standards-based, that would provide another opportunity for all our levels, for sure.
I have one last, not about that question, or it should be an easy question. Measure in 3.2, you talk about academic career planning, and you mention an application called Zello. Do you work with the future centers, or do they have the ability to see some of that data, because they also schedule university visits, et cetera, and help with career planning? So I just want to make sure we're meshing together versus working separately.
Well, that's the easiest question I've had all night. They're a large part of the committee. I wish you should give me more questions like that, Dawn. That was great.
What color is the sky?
They're right on the ground floor doing the work with us. They're fully part of the committee, making these recommendations.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Cooper-Stoll, what are your thoughts on changing that indicator or adding a second one that would allow us to get to what we're hearing here tonight? I don't know if you can.
Yeah, I mean, my suggestion that I was going to make is to table this and bring it back with a additional measure. You know, I know that, I mean, it's Dr. Lechucky indicated, I mean, this has been a year, right? For so many reasons, top of the list, the pandemic. And I know that we're trying to get these templates approved so we can get to monitoring them. And I don't think the board has an interest in holding them up. But again, I think it would be best to table it even just to next meeting, just to take a look at least one other indicator. So again, we don't come back a year from now and then we're looking at another year before we get to this. What do other board members think about that? Making a motion to table it.
I agree. I second that motion.
When we table it, are we tabling it so that we can add another metric, or? Okay, I just want to make sure we're clear on that.
Yeah, the superintendent would bring it back. Do you want to bring it back the next meeting?
Yes, I took a lot of notes. I'm sure Dr. Lechucky did as well. I think we'll be able to generate something that will be closer to the board's intent.
Before we vote on that, I do have one more question. On 3.1, last year, you know, the district was working on a policy to make it available for all students if they're eligible and would like to register to vote before they graduate. Where are we at on that policy?
I may have heard about that, but I did not see it in our policy review committee. So I do not know the status of that. I don't know if it was approved prior to my arrival. So I will report back on that shortly.
And when we did talk about the policy, it goes back to what we were mentioning about the curriculum. It's about the outcome. And so having a policy saying that we were going to have students register is one thing, but then the senior exit survey where they indicate that they actually used their right would be a different thing entirely. So that's why we went down that particular path. Yeah, we will look at the policy but that's why that measure and indicator was about actual output and not just running them through a registration process.
I don't disagree with any of that, Dr. Lechucky. I know we had a presentation before the board last year about it, and know something that Superintendent Nelson had been working on as well, I think along with the League of Women Voters. And so this is more of me just checking in because I've heard nothing more about that policy to see where we are on that. So, all right, so I'm going to make a motion to table R3 until the next board meeting. Is there a second?
I second it.
Okay, can we get a roll call vote, Ms. Steigerwald?
Ms. Como?
Aye.
Ms. Leahy?
Aye.
Mr. Lee?
Aye.
Mr. Korberg?
Aye.
Mr. Spivey?
Aye.
Mr. Turner?
Aye.
Dr. Cooper Stoll?
Aye. All right, we're now going to move to the information portion of the meeting. And first thing we have up is the Operational Expectation Monitoring Report OE5 Financial Planning.
This is our first incidence of bringing a monitoring report to the school board. So I hope you join us in approaching this as a developmental process, hopefully one where we knock your socks off with our excellence, but also one where we are open to feedback and making changes so that we can report the information you need to know to feel satisfied with this OE. With that, I will turn it over to Ms. Sprang, who will kind of walk through the elements of this OE monitoring report. There are a fair number. We're going to go relatively swiftly as a lot of them reference the same documents and same things. And financial planning is relatively black and white, so hopefully you can see that we've identified the items you need to see.
Before I go into that, I just want to let you know that, yes, Policy 4341 High School Voter Registration Program was approved in June 30th, 2020. So,
Ms. Sprang.
there you go. Okay, so just feel free to ask any questions as we go along. We're just going to go and say, okay, OE 5.1, the evidence for the proposed budget documents. We put in there the information that we present to you at the beginning of the budget plan book that tells about the year ahead and what we're expecting. And then we will also attach the preliminary proposed budget, the whole booklet that you received that goes into the budget hearing cycle. Then the measure indicator number 2, again, we will put the preliminary budget book there, and then we will note each day and when those were brought to the board and where you might find that information in the budget book. Any questions before I go on to 5.2? Okay. So 5.2, we're going to credibly describe revenues and expenditures. So what we have for our evidence for number 1 is the budget adoption publication. So that was exactly what you saw on the night that you set the levy and you finalized the original budget. It's in the publication format. So it is showing you how the budget should be presented to you according to the statute 65.90. So we attached also a link to that statute if somebody would want to review that. For indicator number 2, we have the 2021 revenue limit worksheet. However, they are not verified by the state of Wisconsin until the end of the school year. So we also put a link there for DPI where they have the final workbook from the previous years. Then for indicator number 3, we have the budget adjustment presentations link, so that back in summer when you approve the budget adjustments from the prior year, that is on there, and then an explanation on how it aligns with our strategic priorities and operational expenditures. For OE 5.3, we are looking at a budget by function as required by the Wisconsin Uniform Financial Accounting Requirements, otherwise referred to as WUFR. So we put the budget documents, included tables utilizing the budget reporting structure and how WUFR, we've attached a link to WUFR if anybody would like to look through our chart of accounts that we have to work by. Then our evidence would be the plan document that we submit to DPI. However, we do not submit that until late November, so I did not attach that at this time. I can attach it then later on when we submit it. Otherwise, we have the intro to the financial data and all of the text, the graphs, the charts that are in that budget book that show the budget presented as the way DPI requires us to present it to you. The other indicator is the budget hearing. So the budget hearing document where we present the data to you from the prior 2 years and the budget for the coming year. And then OE 5.4. So we have, this one is the superintendent to disclose the major planning assumptions that were used to build the budget. So we have on there the proposed preliminary budget plan and assumptions related to state aid, property values, and those were presented to you on September 21st, so our preliminary budget. So then we just added some of the pages from the budget book that we had gone over with the preliminary budget, and also the revenue limit worksheet that we use to present the budget to you. And that would show you right on that worksheet our assumptions for enrollment, state aid, and the property values that we use in the preliminary budget. For OE 5.5, we have the auditor cash flow information. So the district submitted a budget that reflects adequate cash flow, including short-term borrowing where necessary. Well, as you know, we don't have to short-term borrow because of our fiscal responsibility of handling cash flow as well as we can. And that includes that statement from our auditors every year that points out if our fund balance falls within the parameters that it should to keep us from having to short-term borrow when we are reaching those times where we're not getting aided or any property taxes. So we attach that information from our auditor from the prior year because we do not have that for this year yet. Then the evidence for the budget that has the fund balance designations that you also did back in August, where you looked and you committed and you designated funds towards certain areas of the district's needs. Then we also put the budget forecast presentation. So here we attached actually last year what Mr. Nelson had presented to you early back in spring about what we were looking at as far as going forward. And we're also going to look into other ways that we could do that that might be Dr. Engel's way of presenting to you the assumptions. Let's see, indicator number 4, the district's minimum unassigned fund balance. So we put the policy, I believe, is attached to that, and the statement confirming that that is what we did, or that is where our fund balance is. OE 5.6, this one is the budget reflects compensation inclusive of all the adjustments. So what we did here is, since we have not gone into negotiations yet, we have put the employee compensation that the board agreed to back in May of 2019 for the 1920 school year. And then we also attached that the summary report from the budget book of that year that showed that increase in compensation within our budget. Then we also have the FTEs. You know that Mr. White always brings that to the board and presents our FTEs of our staff and our staff compared to our enrollment as of third Friday. For OE 5.7, the superintendent submits a budget with estimated amounts to meet the needs of the board's governing function. So we put in there, of course, the Board of Education budget that is designated to the board. And then also the budget includes sufficient funds to conduct elections and other statutory required functions, meaning things like having to post your agenda and putting other things in the newspaper. We will probably define that a little bit better going forward in your budget, because there is a function designated just for election and board business. Let's see, 5.8, the estimated expenditures do not exceed the current year revenues unless the board approves the use of reserve funds. So that is what happens when we get in between the proposed budget and the approved budget. We bring to you, prior to you approving that original budget, any indication if we need to use reserve funds to meet the budget expenditures for the year. We do not do that without the board's approval. So then we put in the budget hearing the preliminary budget as opposed to the original budget that the board approves, and a statement verifying that you were made aware and you approved that budget with that knowledge. So then on 5.9, the general budget is submitted with an estimated year-end fund balance of 15% or greater, which is by our policy. And so we put in the statement, I put in what the fund balance was, or what we expect our fund balance to be at the end of this fiscal year. And the statement that shows that that 28% is indeed higher than that 15% required. Then indicator number 2 is, did the prior year exceed 15%, and it did at 31% of the general fund expenditures, and a statement to verify that. And I believe that is it. Questions? As Dr. Engel said, the financial side is pretty cut and dry. So we just have to be sure that we are in compliance. Okay.
No questions?
But was there anything specifically about the audit? I'm trying to remember. I know you referred to parts of it, but I mean, is there something in there that says we have to have an audit, and kind of how we do the procedures of having the audit, and then every so many years going out and you know, looking out to bid that out to see if we are going to switch companies or not?
Yeah, we don't have that as any of our evidence for anything. When I had referred to the auditor, it was to show that our fund balance is such as it is that we do not have to short-term borrow. So we were thinking too that maybe going through this year, we might figure out a better way to present that to you. Maybe, you know, a monthly cash flow kind of chart to show you how having a healthy fund balance eliminates that need to short-term borrow. But do you think we should, are you thinking in any of the evidence, Mr. Korberg, that we should be putting something about the audit?
I think, Mr. Korberg, what some of the questions you're getting to come in OE6, financial administration, where it talks about the requirement to have an auditor and to, you know, analyze our, you know, to review our funds. So there's kind of two buckets. There's the financial administration and then the financial planning. This OE5 is about kind of being good stewards of planning and thinking about the future, whereas administration is more about, are we doing things the right way?
Okay. Thank you.
Well, I don't know if this sounds strange or not, but I'm personally excited that we have our first actual monitoring report coming forward since we transitioned to coherent governance. I feel like it's an accomplishment. So thank you so much, Ms. Sprang. All right, there are no other questions or comments. We're going to move to the next item on under the information portion of the agenda, which is the superintendent's first year performance objectives.
So this item was a part of the agreement with the recruiter for the hiring of the superintendent. Last month, we came up with objectives to pursue for this school year. And then my job was to come up with a timeline to accomplish those with some key tasks. So attached to our agenda there, you'll see the 3 goals. The first being evaluate the SRO program and provide a recommendation. The runway for that was relatively short. So October, gather information, and in November, 2 short weeks here, I will present that information to the school board. Number 2 was development and implement a long-range facility plan. We're going to spend a couple of months gathering up some information, acquiring some tools in order to properly analyze our school district. In the winter here, we're going to develop some options and think about various scenarios. In April and May, we're going to meet with focus groups, interest groups, SKU community to review options, and of course the school board. And then in June, we're going to present kind of a long-range plan for our facilities so that we can start, preparing for what it looks like in the future. And then the third goal was to develop and initiate a strategic plan to advance social justice in the school district. So a strategic plan for equity. October and November, I've been meeting with interest and diversity groups within our school district. In November, I'll develop that plan. And then in December and January, kind of throwing that plan back out to various groups for feedback, to the school board to get feedback, and then initiating that plan in January when we feel comfortable that it includes all the elements we want as we move forward. So that is my action plan per the agreement with our recruiter. Would love any feedback or thoughts.
Any questions or comments for Dr. Engel?
We know that the pandemic is also messing you up with getting this stuff done, but we're glad you're persevering through it and making it happen. So thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it has been maybe a little more difficult in some cases to meet with folks. Also seems like everybody's got like a 45-minute time slot on their Zoom schedule. So people have been very gracious to meet as best they can. And it's been exciting to meet people whenever possible. So thank you.
All right, we're going to move to announcements then. And first up, we have communications from student representatives to the board. Mr. Baggett, is there anything you would like to share at this time?
Just some updates on Logan and then some things I'll be working on. So just the sense that I'm getting from Logan students and staff as a whole is that we are tired this year and very stressed, but holding up and quite resilient. We're also liking the school structure that we've got at Logan, especially how it ends early. People have more time to get to work after school, and that's going well for us. And on a more personal note, COVID's been around for a while, but it's really starting to feel in my backyard. I had one of my teachers' dads get sick at 80, and he's been walking the fence in the hospital for a while now. He's doing a little better now, but it's just very real and very scary. And I'm having a few of my friends who live with their grandparents and other high-risk people in their immediate families get sick. So it just feels very scary and very much at the front door. And then a few things that I'll be working on is I'm surveying, hopefully before the next school board meeting, I will be surveying Logan students and staff and Logan parents on thoughts on hybrid school, levels of stress, anxiety, and how socialization is going. I'm working on creating like more channels for students to socialize this year because Zoom calls don't provide much for people. So if you guys have ideas, by all means, and also just know that I'm trying to figure out ways to get people together because it's hard to keep up with your friends right now. And just working on getting more involved as a student rep, finding more ways to get in touch with people, especially this year, and ways to get opinions and ideas from students and staff at Logan.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Baggett. And again, welcome to the board. We're looking forward to working with you this year. All right. Mr. Korberg, do you have any announcements for us?
Just one thing. On this coming Thursday, board members from the La Crosse Public Education Foundation will be hand delivering to school buildings treats, fruit, and other kinds of munchies as a way to thank our teachers and our staff members for just to appreciate what they've been doing and going through. Typically, we've done this in the spring of the year, and that didn't get to happen last year. As you recall because of the pandemic. And so this is just, again, just an opportunity for us to try to say just a small token of appreciation and to say thank you for this thing, for all the things that they've been going through and what they've been doing. And so looking forward, I'm going to be delivering some myself on that Thursday morning. And hopefully we'll get some media coverage of that. And we'll know that the community is thanking and people are thanking our teachers and our staff in our schools.
Brad, normally they don't have enough people. Do they have enough volunteers this year with the board members, or are you still looking? Or
I have not heard that they don't have enough, but if I hear that, I will get back to people. But I think he's got it filled out.
Right.
I know I kind of held off and said I'll do one, but give me whatever anybody doesn't fill up. And so he gave me my assignment at the end of last week. So I think everybody's good, but I'll find out. We basically have to go and pick up the fruit on the day before, and then stop out the school district to get the munchies, and then take them out to the schools in the morning. So should be a good day.
Yep, it was always fun in the past. So.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Korberg. I don't have any announcements for this evening. Dr. Engel, do you have any announcements?
Yes, I've got two things I'd just like to talk about. There's two major themes of things we're hearing right now in our public. One is the kind of a conflict between certainty and hope. And, there's a lot of folks that, find it very difficult to plan on a week-to-week basis. And I entirely understand that. And there's also a lot of folks that really want the hope of returning to in-person education as soon as possible. And I think it's a little different at each level. It's a little different at the middle and high school level, where childcare concerns are a little less immediate. And at the elementary level, it's a little more real in terms of trying to find childcare and adjusting on a week-to-week basis. So that is something that we're hearing more of the further we get into this school year. There's, I think, some interest in kind of defining a longer period of time for virtual learning, if that's the way it's going to be. And so that's a discussion that we're having right now with our secondary schools and our elementary schools. Do we commit to virtual learning for a longer period of time, maybe through the end of the semester, maybe for a month at a time, maybe through the holidays? What's the right balance there between some certainty and some ability to plan versus hope that we'll reopen in person as soon as we possibly can? I anticipate that on Wednesday, when we make our latest update, we may commit to a longer time frame. We're still thinking through that at this time, but I just wanted to let you know that weighs on us, and we're trying to be responsive to our community's needs in that balance between certainty and hope. The other announcement relates to something that we've heard more of in the community as well. Our CRVA program has been incredibly successful by a number of measures. One of the ones that I think it has been most successful in is preventing open enrollment out to virtual schools. We saw fewer open enrollments out for that purpose this year than we did last year. So I think it has filled a need that our parents were clearly looking for. At the same time, at the elementary level, and particularly the lower elementary level, there are a number of folks who really have found this virtual learning that we're doing, synchronous with the teacher, that ongoing interaction, really beneficial. And we're hearing from some of our lower elementary folks that parents that, they might want that option throughout the rest of the school year to commit to something like that, as opposed to the slightly less personal CRVA option. For some of our students, the existing CRV works incredible in that it's very self-paced. They're able to move at their own speed. They really like that independence. But for others, they need a teacher to really mediate more of that experience. And so as we get into November here and start thinking about next semester, we're exploring a few more options. We might have not just CRVEA in our current model, but maybe a middle path that kind of bridges those two. If we go that route, and we're still investigating it, it will cause a shakeup in enrollments, and it'll be a staffing challenge because we'll have to kind of rearrange some things. But our goal is always to meet our parents' and students' needs, and we think there's an interest in something that looks like what we're doing right now in virtual, and committing to that for the rest of the year. So just wanted to put that on your radar as well, that we're thinking about how to best deliver instructions in a virtual environment for all of our students.
Do you want to entertain any questions about that?
I'd be happy to.
Are there any questions or comments about that for board members before we move on?
If I may, just a comment. I certainly second that, both on a personal level and from what I've heard from a few people, the desire for a middle ground between the current online instruction and sticking with your main schooling and the CRVA, interest in being able to commit to a middle path for extended periods. I agree with that.
Thank you, Mr. Baggett, for that feedback. I appreciate it.
All right. Are there any other announcements from board members before moving on?
I think our big thank you to our teachers. Oh, pardon. Sorry. You can go, Mr. Spivey. You're muted, Mr. Spivey.
My bad. Dang it. I was hoping that wasn't going to happen to me. Well, not necessarily an announcement, so to speak, but just want to bring up last week I was able to, well, I missed it, but we were able to attend some of the amplifying the Black voices of our youth. And while I don't really think the intention was to solely focus on the school district, I was able to see the video after the fact, and I noticed that there was a lot of comments around the school district and student experience within the schools. And I think we have to have some sort of conversation about that. So I don't know if that's like bringing up any agenda planning, if that's inviting the students and the filmmakers to a closed session, whatever that needs to look like. But I don't want to lose. I can't ignore what was stated in some of those films, and I don't think we should. So I don't know, Dr. Ingo, if you have a plan already set aside for that, and if so, I'll be quiet. But I want to bring that to the forefront.
Yeah, I echo your sentiments. I was able to attend that event and watch that film along with over a dozen of our administrators in the school district, I know, and maybe more than that, much more than that, I think, just total employees. But very powerful, and it echoed some of the work we've already done. Mrs. Everson has put together some focus groups for students already as a part of our development of the strategic plan for equity. And we met with some of those students that spoke at that in that film, and so we've heard some of that already, at the high school level. And there's a need to continue that conversation, those focus groups. And a wonderful suggestion by one of our administrators was we need to bring that video to our district leadership team to watch it as a group and to reflect on it and think about our next steps as well. So really ensuring that it reaches every one of our administrators, and then maybe continuing to use that as a tool for building development as well, to understand other voices that have not historically been privileged in our school district. So there are definite plans to use that in the future, and continuing to make that a priority.
And for those that don't know what I'm talking about, there's a group of organizations, the Greater Crosse Diversity Council and Waking Up White organization who created a film or recreated a film. We did, so Black Leaders Acquire Collective Knowledge several years ago did a film where we amplified Black voices in terms of like talking to students about their experience in the city of La Crosse as a whole. And then they recreated that and doing the amplifying Black voices. And it seemed to focus a lot on the school district and school experience. And I know that in November, they're going to be doing one where the parents are going to be talking. I think that's like November 16th or 18th. I'll let you know when I...
18th.
18th? Thanks, Keontae. So might be worth checking out. That's all I got.
Thank you, Mr. Spivey. So we have agenda planning. Speaking of agenda planning.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the November 16th, 2020 Board of Education agenda with any additions or corrections.
Second.
A motion has been made by Mr. Korberg and second by Ms. Como to approve the November 16th, 2020 Board of Education agenda with any additions or corrections. We'll have a roll call vote.
Ms. Como?
Aye.
Ms. Leahy?
Aye.
Mr. Lee?
Aye.
Mr. Korberg?
Aye.
Mr. Spivey?
Aye.
Mr. Turner?
Aye.
Dr. Cooper Stoll?
Aye. All right, we will now move into board debriefing and I will turn it over to Ms. Como.
And I will
Yeah,
ask
so
for
about
assistance
this.
because I was gone last time, so I have not experienced one of these. So am I supposed to answer the first 3 questions and then put it out to everybody for the next 2?
Oh, I love it. We're still figuring this all out. Okay, so you have a few options. You can pose those questions, put those out there to board members. There's 2 ways to do that. 1 and 2 both have to do with soliciting feedback from board members. Mr. Korberg led the first debriefing and chose option 3, which was to provide some feedback from his perspective on the meeting.
Okay.
So you have some options there.
Because I was kind of filling in as I was going along. So I guess I'll do 3 with a mix of 1 and 2, right?
Hey, you can also do whichever you prefer.
So what I love about our board is, what did we do well? We discussed things. We actually like opened our voices. We talked from our heads. We talked from our hearts. And we come from such different backgrounds and experiences that I feel privileged to be on a board with that depth of knowledge to come together. So thank you for being open and talking and discussing. So that being said, what I would say that didn't work well for us is, you know what, I want to hear more. So it's great that we talk, but I want to hear more. I want to hear from everybody. I loved that somebody said, I don't know, what does this mean? Because some people are afraid to say, what does this mean? And they'll just sit back and let it go. So I please continue to ask those questions, even if you don't feel comfortable, because there are a lot of uncomfortable discussions we have to have. And what do we want to improve on? Smiling, people, come on. I know it's Monday, but everybody looks at us and you know, everybody gets popcorn and watches our board meetings. Smile, give them something that says we're engaged and we're happy, and gosh darn it, thanks for electing us, because we care about our staff and our kids. So anybody else have any comments that we did good, bad, or ugly? Except for laughing at me, Lori. Otherwise, that's my thing.
Ms. Como, what I would say is that you led us through that debriefing as only you could.
Exactly. A little crazy.
I don't know if it's board governance or this board, but the emphasis on the right things that a board should be talking about is really impressive to me. whether it's policy, but even within those policies, we're talking about instruction and what we want kids to know. And, you know, we debated how to measure that. Like, that is incredible to me. That's not the typical things we're worried about, which might be, you know, beans, buses, and basketball, which are also good things. But, you know, I'm impressed by this board's attendance to the critical issues that affect students on a regular basis. So thank you.
All right, if there are no further comments or questions, then I'm going to adjourn the meeting, and we'll see all of you virtually in a couple weeks.
Sounds good. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Good night.
Good night.